This is Fans on the Run, a podcast made by, for, and about Beatles fans. And now, here's your host, Alexanian.
All right, hello. Welcome back to Fans on the Run. My name is Alexanian. Again, don't need to say that. You just heard that in the introduction. Yada, yada, yada. I'm running out of things to say in the openings. Again, I'm always open to suggestions, so if you have like a funny joke or a limerick, please email me at fansontherunpodcast@gmail.com. I'm running out of ways to introduce the show. It's, 40 episodes? Can you blame a kid? Anyways, I have a feeling you guys are going to be in for a treat today, because we have a wonderful guest today. He's the author of Postcards From Liverpool, Beatles Moments Memories. Mark Brickley, welcome to Fans on the Run.
Ethan, hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to talking with you, and I hope to, share a whole bunch of stuff from the book and just have a great time.
Well, if that's all we do, have a great time, then it's worth it. Because that's what the show's about. So, on an un-Beatles related note, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm talking to you from Santa Barbara, California. I'm just a little south. I can see the ocean. I live in a condo here, and it's hot today. It's telling you earlier, it's 88 degrees inside my condo. I got my fan going and all the windows open.
Hold on. I'm just, for the sake of clarity, because Fans on the Run is the podcast of clarity, 88 Fahrenheit. I'm Googling as we speak. Okay, so that's 31. That's decent.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so it's about 50 here. I just calculated back again, Celsius to Fahrenheit.
Ah, okay. Well, that's good. I wish it was 50 here. I was raised in Minnesota, so I think it was like 30 below zero when I was born, and so I like the cold weather personally, at least a lot colder than it is right now.
Finally, someone else who actually likes the cold. People treat me like I'm a fucking vampire when I say, I actually like it when it's cold out.
I do too,
Yeah. It's winter is my favorite season because it's cold and it's dark. I don't like it when it's bright out.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's when the bad stuff happens. It's easier to be a night owl in the winter because it's just dark.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I wait for the night now. It's been so warm. I kind of try to stay in the shade as much as I can with this hot weather here on the West Coast, but it's supposed to break here next week, so I'm looking forward to that.
Well, you're making me very envious right now because with all this pandemic stuff, my family kind of has this pattern of going to California every 5 years for a trip, and so this would have been the year we go back to California, and we're not there because of this fucking pandemic.
I'll tell you, there's a lot of great stuff to see. You roll into Los Angeles and go to the Grammy Museum. What a great, music experience that is. And there are just a lot of great concert venues in Los Angeles. And up my way, there's a lot of live music. And so the music scene is, always been centered around Los Angeles with all the great record companies headquartered there. So, from the 60s on, LA's kind of been the place to hang out, at the Troubadour or the Ash Grove.
There's a big record company presence when one of the iconic buildings in your city is a record company's headquarters with the Capitol Records Tower.
Yeah, it's still a great landmark, and of course, all the Beatles have their Walk of Fame stars and their footprints and their fingerprints right in front of the Capitol Records building.
I didn't get a chance to see that, but now I really want to, because now I actually know what I'm looking for going back.
Yeah, Yeah.
Luckily enough, when I was there last, Amoeba Records was still at its, iconic location. So I got to go to the really big one before they got kicked out and they're building a condo there.
Yeah, I hear that. I haven't been down to the Amoeba Records store myself for a year or so, and I guess they are redeveloping that, and Amoeba Records is moving a bit. But what an incredible store that was! Actually, Paul McCartney did a little mini concert at Amoeba Records, and you
that
can
he
actually,
did.
Yeah, you can actually get that. That's available.
It was reissued just last year as a double LP.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't heard that yet. I'd like to do that. I'd like to hear that set that he did. But I was really envious. I wonder how long the line was to get into Amoeba Records that day.
Could you even imagine?
Well, I heard I went down in 2012 when I heard Paul McCartney was going to get his star on the Walk of Fame, and I left Santa Barbara, which is about 90 miles north of the Capitol Records building in Los Angeles, where the ceremony was going to take place. So I got there about 6:30, 6:45, and there were already 200 people in line waiting to, they kept people from actually going to right near the location. But so that line grew to 2,000 people strong by the time the 2 p.m. ceremony took place. And I got some good photographs that are in my book. And I kind of tell that tale about being there. And actually, that was one of the kind of initial Beatles experiences that I had. I was a music writer here for several years before I even started contemplating writing a book about the Beatles. And that was one of the experiences I had, and it was great finally to get. So I took some good photographs that day, and was lucky to get close enough to do that. And hear Paul. He was introduced by Neil Young, and his new wife Nancy Chevelle was there. His son was there, James McCartney. Herbie Hancock was there. There were a lot of luminaries, music luminaries in the audience. Jeff Lynne of ELO was in the audience.
I love Jeff Lynne.
Yeah, fantastic. I guess he just got his MBE from the Queen. So he's been honored by the royals for his contributions to music in England, which is, I think, long overdue.
First time it can be said that a member of the Move has received honors from the Queen.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, probably ELO was the thing that really moved that along. But you're right. Yeah, better believe it. Hey, just to kind of move forward a little bit. So I published about 100 articles, more than 100 articles before I even got the idea to really go forward with a book about the Beatles. And I've written about everything: classical music, jazz, 60s rock. I had a big piece on Michael Jackson that a lot of people read, and I was writing for magazines in Southern California here. And then I had some other Beatles experiences. I was invited to a press conference that Ringo Starr had for his memorabilia collection. The first time they showed it at the Grammy Museum, this was in 2013, and I was able to take some pictures of Ringo, and I got a chance to ask him a question, which was kind of fun. And so then I heard a rumor, Ethan.
I can tell you almost called me Nathan.
I didn't say that. I heard a rumor that in Ojai, California, there was a musician with ties to the Beatles. And I said, well, who the heck could that be? Here, I've been writing about music. Ojai's about 30 miles from where I live. And I said, how could I miss that there's someone associated with the Beatles? And they said, well, yeah, he's been living there for like 25 years, and he's in early Apple Records recording artist. So I went up to Ojai and I walked around. I talked with different shop owners. They have a big promenade. I walked up and down. I finally went into an English tea shop, and the proprietor there was a really nice woman, and she said, "Oh yes, I think the person you're thinking of is Jackie Lomax."
No way.
Yeah. I said, "Yeah, I think that's who I'm thinking of." And there was an Englishman in the tea shop that I went into, and he said, "Oh, I know Jackie. Give me your number, and I'll have Jackie ring you up." And sure enough, 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Jackie Lomax, who was, whose record first album was produced by George Harrison, and George Harrison gave him, of course, his single Sour Milk Sea, which had Eric Clapton on it, Nicky Hopkins, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr.
What a great album that is, though.
Oh God, yeah.
I'm trying to remember the title. It's called like, "Is This What You Really Want?"
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have Ethan. You have a great memory.
Well, I have the record.
I'm sure you do. Yeah. So Jackie told me some great stories, and sitting in his Ojai bungalow with tube amps kind of strewn around, lots of guitar cases, and Beatles memorabilia, posters and stuff. He had pictures taken of him by Astrid Kirchner.
Oh.
I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, as if I'm not, everyone will be cringing, but I think that's correct. A German name. And of course, she took all the early pictures of the Beatles and was a great friend of theirs, and was going to marry Stuart Sutcliffe, the Beatles' early bassist. And of course, that engagement was short-lived because he died of a brain hemorrhage not too long after he left the Beatles and decided to stay in Hamburg and hang out with and pursue his painting, and was going to get married to Astrid. But anyway, he told me a story. He said that after Stuart Sutcliffe and Astrid, were separated because of Sutcliffe dying in England of this brain hemorrhage, he took up with Astrid and had a fling with her. And he said, no one knows that, but I think I can tell the story now because pictures that Astrid took of Jackie were all over his walls and in his home there in Ojai. But so anyway, Jackie was a great, basically he started, he had a Guinness stout. I turned on the tape recorder and I just heard one story after another. And that's one of the chapters in my book. It's one of the big long interviews that I have is with Jackie Lomax.
I can only imagine just sitting in Jackie Lomax's living room.
I'll tell you, I got some pictures of him too, some good pictures. His thing, he had really long fingers, and he told me the story of how he was in a band in Wallasey, which is right across the River Mersey from Liverpool. I don't know. Have you had a chance to get to Liverpool yet, Ethan?
I have.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about, and you can take the ferry right across the River Mersey. And
I mean, sure, if you're a member of Jerry and the Pacemakers.
No, anybody can do that. Anyway, I did that, and I think everybody should. It's not really much of a river crossing because it takes about 3 minutes. But anyway, yeah, that's where Jackie was from, and shows you how close they were to the Liverpool scene. And he got into the Undertakers because their bass player was picking fights, Jackie said, with the audience, and the audiences were rough back then in the late 50s and early 60s. I mean, there were a lot of fights, the Teddy Boy types. We know that after Ringo Starr joined the Beatles, that George Harrison was headbutted at the Cavern, and in the first publicity photos that that were taken of the Beatles at EMI Studios in London, you can see George's shiner. He's got a black eye, so the audience was rough. So anyway, this guy, evidently, Jackie said, this bass player that the Undertakers had, was losing them gigs, as he liked to say. I remember him saying it that way. And he said, so they said, why don't you, Jackie didn't have a bass guitar, but the band did. So he paid it off, evidently. And he kind of had a soulful blues sound. He said he wanted to try sound as black as he could, which I thought was kind of hilarious. But that was his style of singing. He had a real soulful voice, and the Beatles played on the same stage with the Undertakers at the Cavern. Excuse me, not on the same stage, but the Undertakers played at the Cavern, and on the same shows the Beatles were on, and then they followed the Beatles to Hamburg and played in Germany when the Beatles were there too. So Jackie unfortunately was ill, and he didn't tell me about it during our interview. And he went back for a trip. He went about 6 months later, 4 to 6 months later. I did 2 articles on him, one for Ojai Quarterly magazine, and then one for a newspaper, a local newspaper. And then I published a much longer interview in my book, Postcards from Liverpool. But Jackie was ill, and he didn't tell me about it. He was a little grumpy. I picked up on that, but he had cancer, and he died just about 5 or 6 months after I interviewed him. So, and on his trip back to Wallasey, and I'm glad he got back to Northern England, and that's where he passed.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got the chance to interview him.
Oh yeah. So just to very briefly. So after these experiences, I said, hey, maybe I have a book here. And so the very first article that I had done, I wanted to add something to the Beatles written history. And I'd done some research. This was in 2011, 12. And I said, I'd like to write about, there wasn't a lot of information about the backstory to how the Beatles became recording artists that I could find. And I said, well, I'd like to really do some research and find out, how Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You and Ask Me Why and all those early songs, where they came from, how the Beatles transitioned from a cover band. For the first 6 years of their existence, they were really a cover band, but breaking through and making the decision to insist that one of their original songs, which was, not something that George Martin, their producer, wanted to do. He wanted them to record a song by, Mitch Murray called
How Do You Do It?
Yeah, exactly. So, but, their insistence that, they couldn't go back to Liverpool having their first record be someone else's cover, they said to Martin. Well, there were other influences that were going on there.
Didn't stop Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Jerry and the Pacemakers got that song. Jerry Marsden, who was their lead singer. Mitch Murray was very happy that his song became a #1 hit, in England. But, the Beatles, I think, showed a lot of courage. And, it really was an earth-shaking decision on their part, because it really, by challenging the convention at that time, which was to use other songwriters' material, the Beatles struck out on their own, and their destiny, became real. And one song followed another after that, and Lennon and McCartney's genius was able to be revealed.
Well, you have a lot of Beatles stories, but I want to ask you about your Beatles story. I want to go right back to the beginning. How did you first discover the Beatles?
Well, that's interesting you say that. I first saw the Beatles on my little black and white television, like me and 71 million other people across the U.S. In 1964 when they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show that February, and I would think I was 12. I'm 12, probably 12 years old, and I was just transfixed because television was just an amazing thing for me just to be able to watch back then. I was just astounded by it at that age. But, being able to see the Beatles perform on Ed Sullivan was truly amazing. And to have that memory, throughout my teens, the Beatles never performed in Santa Barbara. As I got a little older, I started going to rock shows here locally, and I saw Cream, and I saw the Jefferson Airplane, and Jimi Hendrix. Oh yeah, sure did. I stood right in front of Eric Clapton and Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce at Earl Warren Showgrounds in 1967 or 68 when they came. They weren't together very long, but that was quite a band.
Oh. That's an understatement.
Ginger Baker was a maniac. I couldn't believe anybody could play drums like that. He had to have been high. He was just so outrageous. It was amazing.
Have you seen the documentary Beware Mr. Baker?
I haven't seen that yet.
Oh, you've got to. It's
Yeah, I've heard about it.
It is wonderful. My friend and I watched that together, and we were just howling with laughter because the man is just he was absolutely crazy.
That's available on Netflix, right?
Well, I probably shouldn't say this, but it's also available for free on YouTube.
Oh, thank you. I'll watch it.
Yeah, but you didn't hear it from me, and neither did any of you out there.
That's right.
Don't shoot the messenger.
Right. So anyway, I started seeing rock shows, and the Love and Spoonful came through, and I saw Jimi Hendrix, as I mentioned to you, and Buffalo Springfield, and all those great, mid 60s bands that were touring, and I was 16.
Here's the important question.
Yeah.
Did you see the Byrds?
I didn't see the Byrds, but I've seen Chris Hillman and David Crosby perform individually. I never had a chance to actually hear the Byrds live, but they're one of my favorite bands.
I just had to ask because I've been on a Byrds kick lately.
Oh, sure.
One of the records I picked up the other day when I was in Toronto was a nice copy of Younger Than Yesterday.
Oh, great track. Well, the Byrds really, the Beatles were their template, and Roger McGuinn, got a 12-string Rickenbacker after he heard George playing it, and saw him live, and so the Byrds were really on that with their harmonies too. They had some really incredible singers in that group, and their covers kind of is what made them stand out. All the early Dylan stuff that they covered, and so I love the Byrds.
So I want to ask, what was the first Beatle record that you remember owning?
I probably got, I was looking back, and I have all the Capitol singles. Here on the West Coast, I don't, maybe there were imports that were available in other parts of the country, but other part of the country. But I think we had Sam Goody, and we had Tower Records out here when I was growing up, and so I bought 45s because that's what I could afford. I remember the first album I got was Rubber Soul, but before that I collected 45s because that, and I think I had, I think sure I had I Want to Hold Your Hand and So that's probably the first song I can remember collecting by the Beatles. Maybe She Loves You. It's possible. But I also, as I collected their singles, Day Tripper is one that I still have, actually. Original Capitol Records single.
Oh, man. I also love collecting singles, especially in this day and age where records are starting to get a little expensive. I feel like singles are like the last frontier where you can actually still find deals.
Well, yeah, that's true, and I haven't bought them yet, but all of the Beatles singles are available. They have the sleeves are from different countries where they were issued, so they're not actually the original sleeves that they came in, say, on Parlophone Records, from the UK. But still, it's a heavier grain vinyl.
Yeah.
So evidently the sound reproduction is really good. But I've been thinking about getting all the Beatles singles just as a treat. Maybe this Christmas I'll do that.
Well, I bought that box last year, and it sounds fantastic. I'd recommend it.
I've heard that. Oh, that's great.
It's all analog.
Exactly. In my book, Postcards from Liverpool, I have a chapter called Here, There, and Everything Beatles. And the book originally came out in 2017. It took me about 4.5 years to write. And then it was the cover was, and I wish I could show it to everybody. It's an orange cover with a series of stamps, but the front stamp is the prominent one. It's the Beatles walking across the crosswalk at Abbey Road. And then it's orange with kind of a reddish Postcards from Liverpool below it.
Explain to the folks at home what Abbey Road is.
Abbey Road. Well, Abbey Road was probably called Abbey Road because there was an English abbey nearby. I mean, if you go way back, that's where the word abbey comes from. And it was probably turned from a cow path in the 1400s or 1500s into a road, which became Abbey Road, which goes right by EMI Studios. EMI Studios were where Parlophone Records was headquartered, and they were a small subsidiary of Electronic Music Industries, is what EMI stands for. Mm-hmm. And then, after the Beatles posed for their great 1968 album, they changed the name of the studio to Abbey Road Studios. But the road, Abbey Road, was always there and goes back hundreds of years.
Well, you kind of brought up something. It's one of the things I always find the most interesting, that the Beatles were on basically EMI's reject label. They weren't good enough to be on Columbia, and the head guy at HMV didn't want them, and so they stuck them on Parlophone, which is basically just like easy listening music and comedy and spoken word stuff.
You're absolutely right. George Martin, the great producer, and he was doing classical and comedy records, and the Beatles, of course, loved that because they were super into all the comedy that he had recorded. Spike Mulligan and all those artists.
Like the Goons and stuff.
The Goons, yeah, and that's exactly the kind of humor the Beatles loved. John Lennon especially.
That's why they got Richard Lester to do A Hard Day's Night.
Exactly.
He did running, jumping, and standing still.
Yeah. And George Martin had never recorded a rock band before, never produced a rock record before. He was looking around, for other groups too. When Brian Epstein Epstein had some pull. Because his record store in Liverpool and his family kind of business connections, he was selling a lot of records up there, and so he he got some attention there, and Dick James and through his contacts was introduced to George Martin, and Martin came up to see the Beatles perform before he signed them at the Cavern, and he didn't guarantee him much of anything. I mean, their first contract, I mean, it was contingent on a demo session when they came in to do Love Me Do and Ask Me Why, and an early slower version of Please Please Me, and then How Do You Do It was also the song that, of course, Martin wanted them to record. But you're right that Parlophone Records had never been a rock label before the Beatles.
And funny enough, because of the Beatles, Parlophone's the only one out of the 3 labels I mentioned that still exists.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. HMV doesn't exist, and EMI, even when they were around, didn't even own the rights to the Columbia name anymore.
Well, it's interesting, the whole Columbia, the whole EMI Capitol Records connection, because EMI owned Capitol Records, but the Capitol Records had discretion to put out whatever records they wanted to, and they rejected the Beatles several times. Were offered in 62, 63, were offered the Beatles several times, and of course they had to go to Toley Records and VJ Records to have their Swan Records, these little subsidiaries from the Midwest, Chicago area.
Well, here's where I'll get smug with my national pride. Capitol Records in Canada was smart enough, not just getting the Beatles before everyone else did. Name like any other big band of the British invasion that had something to do with EMI, and Capitol Records of Canada snatched them up right away. So that's why when you look at the Canadian versus American albums, all the Hollies stuff, Manfred Mann, who else? The Yardbirds, they're all on Capitol here. Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Yeah.
Dave Dexter
Cliff
Jr.
Richard
must have been fucking kicking himself.
Yeah, exactly. But Cliff Richard had kind of preceded the Beatles to the States, and hadn't really hit over here. So there was a lot of trepidation about. Of course, the Capitol Records had the Beach Boys at that time, and they were just burning up the charts with 409 and In My Room and Surfing Safari and all that kind of stuff. And I love that music, but that was a really centered in Los Angeles. That was their big band at the time. But so I can understand them. But finally, they came to their senses, and they put a lot of money into promoting the Beatles' first record, I Want to Hold Your Hand. More money than they ever put into another band. They knew it was the Beatles were going to be big in the U.S. and they pulled out all the promotional stops to make that record happen and climb the charts. It went from in New York City. It went from 35 to 1 in 1 week. So there was a lot of airplay.
Well, it takes a very special band to take up at basically the start of their career, the top 5 spots on the Billboard charts.
Absolutely, and that's incredible. April 5th, 1964, number 1, Can't Buy Me Love, followed by Twist and Shout, She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and Please Please Me. And in addition to that, there were 4 or 5 other Beatles songs on the Billboard Hot 100 chart at the same time. So
if my memory serves me correct, the Beatles were so hot, even an imported single from Canada, All My Loving, cracked the top 50.
Yeah.
Again, Capitol Records must have been kicking themselves because 3 out of those 5 singles in the top 5 were from those weird reject labels out of Chicago and stuff.
Incredible. And they made a lot of money off the Beatles during that transitional period. Finally Capitol Records went to court, and they were able to get the rights back from these labels we talked about in the Midwest, and from then on, they were, all the compilation Beatles stuff came out on Capitol Records. They didn't follow the sequence that Parlophone put the Beatles out, but until 1967 when Sgt. Pepper came out. But yeah, I mean, Capitol made a gigantic mistake, and they played catch up for a while, but they were so big, and EMI was so big that they were able to prevail.
So, I want to ask, what do the Beatles mean to you?
Well, I'd like to ask the same question of you. I'll tell you just briefly that, positivity, joy, the beauty of their harmonies, if the power of their music, it's unexpected joy when you hear Lennon and McCartney singing, and a good example of that is the way they sang in parallel thirds, and with the song "This Boy" and George Harrison. It's such a great example of the power of their harmonies. I mean, it just lifts you up, and so that's what I'm a musician myself, and that's what I really wanted to communicate in my book, Postcards from Liverpool, is that they're...
What's the name of the book again?
Postcards from Liverpool. Beatles Moments and Memories. But that's what I really wanted to communicate, was the joy that their music has always brought me and still does. I mean, I listen to CDs in my car, which is the only place really to listen to music these days. And I just, there really isn't, there's so much great music that was created in the 60s, but the Beatles will always be at the top. And they mean so much personally to me now, because I've got to know so many other people in the Beatles community, and getting to know you today. I mean, that's what the Beatles music is as well, is that it connects people to each other. And that's that shared appreciation and joy and beauty, and so that's just a little bit of scratching the surface of what they mean to me, but it's a deep current in my life.
Well, I'll kind of piggyback off that and ask, why do you think the Beatles still matter today?
Well, I think it all comes back to the music, and and although it's, some people say they created a few more cuts, a few more tracks, at 219 songs, they have, and when you listen to their music, almost none of their music sounds the same. They have so many different beginnings and endings. So much went into their music, so much creative energy, and certainly, kind of fueling art rock. And I think that...
Actually, you mentioned something which I kind of want to butt in and say something that I don't think the Beatles get enough credit for. There's a statement that I don't think anyone has ever said. It's like, hey, the Beatles don't get enough credit. In an era where, if you had a hit song, your next record would sound like that, and then the follow-up record would also sound like that. The Beatles were never a victim of that.
Never. No, and it's just astounding, the extraordinary songwriting ability that they had. They gave away songs too. I mean, Billy J. Kramer, got one number one hit from a song that John gave him in '63, and certainly McCartney gave away some of his stuff too. So they just had the riches, the horn of plenty. They were just a group that comes along maybe once every 100,000 years. I don't know what music will be like, many decades and eons in the future, but I think people will always look to the Beatles. You know, they were truly from another universe.
Do you think the same could be said about like Freddie and the Dreamers?
Well, no, you know.
Do you think people will still be doing the Freddie 100,000 years from now?
No. I probably tried to do that when I was 16 years old, but I'm not sure I was any good at it. I think you had to flap your arms and kind of do jumping jacks. It's kind of the jumping jack kind of a thing, wasn't it?
Something like that. It's out of all the Beatles contemporaries in the 60s, I always laugh the most when I read about Freddie and the Dreamers. Because it's like, okay, Capitol Records didn't sign anybody else. They didn't sign Jerry. They didn't sign the Hollies. But they signed the only other group that Dave Dexter Jr. thought was good enough to be on Capitol Records was Freddie and the fucking Dreamers.
Well, you know, I'm telling you now, I think that was a #1 record. And Mitch Murray helped write that record. Freddie Garrity, who was the lead singer for Freddie and the Dreamers, couldn't finish it. So they called up Mitch Murray, who'd had a couple of hits with you know, previously with the Pacemakers, and he helped them. He helped write finish that song, that big song that was a #1 hit here.
Well, I know Mitch Murray also had something to do with Hermits. Was he a member?
No, I don't think so. You know, the Hermits. Believe it or not, Peter Newton lives right here, about 10 miles away from where I live, and I see him every now and then, and I've heard him, and boy, he still has a great voice. He is an entertainer with a capital E. If you ever get a chance to see him and his band tour through Toronto, go. He's incredible. But no, I don't think Peter was or Freddie was part of the Newton's band, the Hermits, but. You know, what a great string of hits the Hermits had. I think I still enjoy their music.
Oh, they did have some great songs.
No Milk Today, and, you know, I'm Henry VIII, I Am. That actually was a song that came from back in 2000, excuse me, in 1909. Ironically enough, that was a music hall song that was kind of revamped by the Hermits, and of course that was their #1 song here in the U.S. I'm Henry VIII, I Am, sung with a Cockney accent.
That was I knew about that song long before I knew what Hermits was. You know, we were in history class and it's like, I'm Henry VIII, I am Henry VIII. Okay, I'm gonna stop singing before I get, you know.
No, keep going.
No, before I get smacked with copyright issues.
There you go.
See, I may think I'm like some sort of minor deity, but I'm still afraid of the copyright police, just like everybody else.
So true.
Okay, fine. Maybe I think I'm a major deity. Who knows? Can you say God complex?
I don't know about that.
Yeah. What the hell am I talking about? Anyways, so this is where we get really opinionated in the show.
Okay.
What is your favorite Beatles song?
Okay. Well, you know, are we talking about early Beatles or late Beatles, or I mean, we're just talking about? I mean, I have to narrow it down to one song.
Well, if you want to break it up by era, you can. Like favorite early song, favorite middle song, and favorite later song.
Well, I'll tell you. You know, I'm a George Harrison fan, so you know, I really liked I really like Savoy Truffle and I Need You and If I Needed Somebody. Those are great songs by Harrison. I like those better than some of his more well-known stuff because I've heard that stuff so often. Here Comes the Sun and something and all that. But you know, I'm a big fan of Lennon. I always liked the song Good Morning off of Sgt. Pepper. It's such a bright, I mean, it just gets you going. And Ringo's drumming, where he does that drum, that snare roll at the very beginning. You know, oh, what a wake up that is.
Have you ever listened to just the isolated drum tracks from that song? It's
Incredible.
Mental. If I didn't know any better, I'd say Ringo was using like a double kick pedal or something, but it was probably just
you never know.
overdubs with Paul on the toms like they did on Strawberry Fields. But it's
you know, I love McCartney's riff-driven songs. I love Day Tripper and you know, Drive My Car. I mean, they're just such great tracks that you can listen to over and over. But I also like their early stuff. I mentioned This Boy, and I think that, you know, you have to. It's really the Beatles harmonies that I think are going to be will keep the band. The band will endure into the 22nd and 23rd century based on their harmonies and their early material, I think. But you know, Lennon. I love his the song Because, you know, that the Moonlight Sonata, Beethoven's song, the chords that were kind of played backward by Yoko Ono and John constructed Because. I love those harmonies. You know, She's So Heavy.
Well, I noticed like 2 of the songs you've said so far are songs entirely structured around the harmonies. This Boy and Because.
Yeah, you know, exactly, and I think that to me, even you know, on the some of the covers the Beatles did originally, they did such a beautiful job on them. So, you know, you mentioned the Ronettes. I think that the covers that they did originally were really beautifully done. And, you know, of course, you know, you go back to the Beatles' first number 1 or number 2 hit, depending on whether or not, you know, you believe one chart or another. But Please Please Me, I mean, the way, you know, McCartney held that top note for 12 beats and John Lennon belted out that verse. I mean, my God, I mean, that revolutionized, you know, the way popular music would play out over the next years. So those are some of my, as I say, I mean, it's just so hard for me to narrow down because I have so many go-to songs of the Beatles. I don't necessarily like the most popular Beatles tracks, but, you know, they wouldn't be my favorites, but I think there are so many rarities that you can look at that people may miss. I talked with Kid O'Toole about a song called Not a Second Time. It's on the Beatles' second album with the Beatles. It's on Parlophone. And she wrote about it, I think in one of her, you know, many newspaper columns or online, some online column in terms of her rare tracks. But that's an example of one of Lennon's truly great songs, Not a Second Time.
Well, it might have also been in her. I'll give her a plug. Her fantastic book, Songs We Were Singing. Where, yeah, it's a great book. I really like that book. The book that Kit wrote, and she's coming out with another one. It's on. I think it's structured around fandom, and so that it's going to be released with Ken Womack here. I think in March, next March. There you go. Hi, Kit. I know you're listening to this. just kidding. I've already come to accept the fact that no one listens to this show.
Well, you never know. Yeah, you'd be surprised. You get a lot of fans out there. Even.
Yeah, it's almost reaching the double digits now.
Hey, well, there you go.
Yeah,
you know. Hey, it's like you can capture Toronto and then move your fingers across the states.
You've already mapped out my career.
Yeah. Why not?
Well, you touched on. Well, actually, I want to ask the flip side to that last question. What's your least favorite Beatles song?
Why Don't We Do It in the Road and Piggies. And I'd probably get a lot of flack for that, but those are the two songs that don't really appeal to me. But
Okay, I get Why Don't We Do It in the Road, but Piggies? I love Piggies.
it's okay. It's okay. It's just, I don't know. It's kind of has a music hall, kind of an amusing kind of a taste to it. But so, you asked me. That's what I say. I mean, of 219 songs, and there are only two that I can really quote that don't particularly appeal to me. But yeah, I mean, Piggies. A lot of people like Piggies.
I guess it's just I like any song from the '60s with a harpsichord in it.
Oh, you're right. Absolutely. And George Martin did the, played that in the song "In My Life." He played that harpsichord solo. It sounds like a harpsichord, but it's not a harpsichord. It was actually
a sped up piano.
Well, he recorded it at half speed, and they played it back at regular speed, and it sounded like a harpsichord. But I wonder on Piggies if Harrison's playing or if George Martin's playing. I haven't researched that.
Before I get back to like a Beatles-centered question, we've talked about a couple other groups that aren't the Beatles. I want to ask, what are your top 5 desert island albums of the 60s that aren't the Beatles?
Well, I'm a Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young fan. I think Deja Vu is one of the great albums of the 60s. I love the Mamas and Papas. They didn't have a big, long discography, but their first album was absolutely terrific. I play a version of California Dreamin', so I have an affinity for that. And I loved, they just those harmonies are they just stand out to me. I was a big Jefferson Airplane fan. I love the San Francisco bands. I got a chance to hear them several times, and during their heyday. Wasn't a big Grateful Dead fan, but I really like them now. I really appreciate Jerry Garcia's playing.
What I think's a really underrated one of those San Francisco bands, Moby Grape. I love them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And try to get their first album for under $1,000. It is a rarity.
Yeah,
it's really collectible. Yeah, I love that band too. And It's a Beautiful Day, another great band with a violin player in it. Joy of Cooking. All those San Francisco bands I loved. Country Joe and the Fish. I got a chance to see them live when I was in my mid-teens. So yeah, I mean that's kind of in the center of my interest. I love the Doors too, and had a chance to hear Ray Manzarek do a solo show at a bookstore, and he played Riders on the Storm, the piano solo to that, the electric piano solo to that, and just an astounding memory to have.
I'm not even a keyboard player, but every time I listen to Ray Manzarek, I want to take up the organ. Just I want to sit at that Vox Continental organ and just play like him, except I'm dumb and I don't have good fingers.
Well, I got a feeling that Robbie Krieger, and I have a little story about the Doors drummer,
Jim Densmore.
Yeah, Jim Densmore. I for 2 years in a row before this terrible pandemic hit us, there was an event called Doors Day in Los Angeles, and so one of the Doors, would show up for one event, a little event, just to share with fans, and fans would show up. I went down to see Manzarek, not Manzarek. It was Robbie, John Densmore. There was two streets that they renamed in the Valley for Morrison Avenue. So I thought that was pretty cool. So he was down there for the dedication event, and he read some of Morrison's poetry, and extemporaneously sang one of their songs. And then I went down, I had tickets to the LA Philharmonic, and went down to Los Angeles with a friend. And we sat, it was Brahms' Fifth Symphony, and then there was a drum, some kind of a drum symphonic piece that was a percussion piece. And I looked over to, sitting right next to the person I was with, and there was John Densmore. And I said, oh my God, I can't believe it. So at the intermission, I said a quick hello to him and had a chance to chat with him. But that was a remarkable Doors experience.
And now I'll kind of divert things back towards the Beatles. What's your favorite Beatles album?
How about album cover and then album? No, I don't know.
Fair enough.
It's just no. I love Rubber. I've always felt an affinity with the cover of Rubber Soul. But there are just so many great tracks on it as well. But I'd probably have to say that my favorite Beatles album is Abbey Road, just because of the big long medley that kind of, it's the last sequentially recorded song album by the Beatles, and it's that second side of the first side has, of course, some wonderful individual tracks, and every single one is great. But that medley on the back side of Abbey Road, I think to me is the pinnacle of rock music. Period.
And well, I can't say I disagree with you. There's something magical about that medley.
Yeah.
I can't even put my finger on it, why it hits so deep.
Yeah. It just draws you in, and I got the Abbey Road box set, the new one, the remix by Giles Martin, and they have the Her Majesty, in where it's originally was going to be placed, and boy, I might have had a little different take on it if Her Majesty was in its original placement, but I'm so glad that it was kind of a forgotten little piece of tape that they stuck on the end of the reel, and that, what is it, 17 seconds later? How many seconds is it later, Ethan, that it clicks in, and it's just such a wonderful way to end it all. Just kind of that levity and just that music hall, sense of humor that the Beatles, I think, was always a part of their music.
And again, I'll ask the flip side of that question. What's your least favorite Beatles album?
Yeah, we're talking about original Parlophone albums or Capitol Records albums. I try to stay with the Parlophone Records albums. I would say Let It Be, probably, because that whole recording project was a mess from the very beginning. And, there's some great individual tracks on it. I'm so glad they finally got the very first song. If you go back to 1960, when they were playing in Liverpool, there's a set list, and I talk about it in my book, that I describe, and I list the songs on the set list. It's the very first time the Beatles actually, it's documented that they played an original song, and it was One After 909. And so I'm so glad that made it on the album. Dig a Pony. There are a lot of great cuts on Let It Be. But if you're asking me just overall, to me, Along a Winding Road, I love the orchestrations that Phil Spector did. I think that it's a noteworthy album. I also have the Naked album that Paul McCartney, re-recorded, Let It Be Naked. So, and that's okay too. But I grew up listening to the tracks as they were as Phil Spector originally produced them. So, it's really hard for me to pick my least favorite Beatles album, because every single Beatles album has, so many gems on it and they still sparkle.
Yeah.
But you pin me down, Ethan.
Well, it's the show's about the tough choices, and
life is a lot of tough choices, isn't it?
Especially these days.
You're right.
Well, now I get to turn it over to you. What would you like to plug?
Well, I'd love people to pick up my book, Postcards from Liverpool, Beatles Moments and Memories. Its expanded version has 4 additional chapters, 24 new photographs. So, it went from about 150 pages to about 203 pages. So it's also in a smaller font. It's been reformatted. The first when it first came out in 2017, that was kind of my first stab at really understanding how this whole business worked. And I think the font size was a little too big. So it's in the normal font size that people read in any book by any Beatles author. So, the new chapters, one is called Toppermost of the Poppermost, Almost. And it's the story of how Engelbert Humperdinck's Release Me and Let Me Love Again, his single in 1967, kept the Beatles off of the top spot for their double A-sided masterpiece, Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane. And then there's another chapter about my meetup with Pete Best in 2018 at the San Diego Beatles Fair. And that was a remarkable experience. And I talk about a lot of stuff in that chapter that I think people, and I got some good pictures of Pete playing drums. What a great drummer he still is. Never the drummer that Ringo was, but still he, that atom beat that he created certainly did power the Beatles' early sound. And he was a Beatle for 2 years, and he played on the Decca demos and the first version of Love Me Do before he got fired. So he certainly is a noteworthy part of the Beatles' history. So anyway, getting to meet him was just such a treat, and he's such a nice guy. He puts so much into his Liverpool cocktail, so many great stories, and he's a funny guy, and he's got that Liverpudlian wit and sense of humor. So that's another chapter. I went to the White Album symposium that you called that. I don't know if were you there, Ethan, at the White Album conference at Monmouth University?
No, I was not there. Everyone I know keeps bringing up that damn symposium.
I'm so sorry. But anyway, I have a whole chapter in the book about it, and with some great pictures. I went a day early, and I went to all Bruce Springsteen's haunts down the Paramount Theater, the Wonder Bar down in Ashbury Park, which is only about 20 minutes from Monmouth University. I'd never been there, and boy, what a beautiful campus that is. Ken Womack, the great Beatles author, was such a fantastic host for that conference. There was a smorgasbord of wonderful Beatles events and symposiums, great music that played out over 3 days. Mark Lewison gave the keynote address, and I talk about that in the book. And then the book ends with an author's interview, and also a chapter called Here, There, and Everything Beatles, kind of a riff off that Capitol Records album with the same part of the same title in it. And it's really a look at kind of the Beatles fandom, everything Beatles. It starts out with how to grade Beatles records, how to buy, rare singles and albums and not get ripped off. And then it goes into, looking at Beatles media and Beatles authors, and all the great tribute bands that are out there, many of them that I've seen. Then I end that chapter, another chapter with in that section with all the Beatles tours that both here in the States and internationally in Hamburg and in England that people can take advantage of when they travel. So we're all going to be able to travel. We're all going to go to Liverpool again. We're all going to go to Hamburg. We're all going to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We're going to get out there again. This pandemic is not going to keep us Beatles fans from enjoying life.
Yeah. I hope life gets back to normal sooner rather than later, so we can do that stuff all safely.
Me too. And safely, exactly. But that's what Postcards from Liverpool is all about. It's a lot of fun. It's vignettes, it's backstories, it's interviews. I got some great pictures of Paul and Ringo and Patty Boyd and Denny Lane and Peter Asher and Nancy Chevelle McCartney, and have a good interview with short but a nice interview with James McCartney and some photographs of him. I saw him perform here in Santa Barbara when he came and toured the States on his first album called Me, and then he had Blackberry Train after that, which was another good album that James put out. So I just hope that I can communicate the joy of the Beatles music in my writing, and I hope that everybody will enjoy it.
And now, Mark, where can people find this book of yours?
They can find it on Amazon, of course. Everything's on Amazon.
All hail Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, hail Jeff Bezos. If you don't want to buy it on Amazon, which is the easiest way to get it here in the States, or probably in Canada. By the way, I want to shout out to, do you know Jerry, who wrote all the Beatles recording manuals? Jerry Hamarack?
He's also Canadian-based.
He's from Toronto. You've got to get him on your show. He's an analog recording engineer. And
by the time this interview goes up, the interview with Jerry will also be up. Good, outstanding. Yeah, he's right there in Toronto, and I'm sure he'd love to talk with you. He sat next to me and got to know him and his wife at one of the Beatles fests. So Postcards from Liverpool, which is my book, is available on Amazon, any electronic retailer, or your favorite bookstore. You can order it. And one last question, just in case the people haven't heard. What's the name of the book again?
Postcards from Liverpool, Beatles Moments and Memories. And
now, here's the most challenging part of my show, where I have to recite the spiel at the end. So if you've enjoyed this, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, hit that notification icon, so you get notified every time one of these delicious episodes gets uploaded. Did I really just use the word delicious? Oh man, I might edit that out, but I might not. If you're listening on some streaming service, please rate us 5 stars, even if you don't like the episode. It massages my ego. But yeah, the episode's available to stream everywhere good podcasts and most bad podcasts can be heard. Like this one. No, I jest. But anyways, now that that's out of the way, Mark, I just want to give you a big thank you for coming on the show today.
I really enjoyed talking with you, Ethan, and I really wish you all the success you deserve, and I hope that one of these days I'll be able to see you and meet you in person.
Likewise. And to everyone else out there, thank you for listening. You can go home now.
Bands on the Run is produced by Ethan Alexanian. Additional voiceovers by Richard Phillip. This has been a Showtown production.